Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Ask Us Anything. I'm Mark Graban, Senior Advisor with KaiNexus. We are joined by
Greg Jacobson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of KaiNexus.
And this is actually, I don't know if you realize this, Greg, this is number 30. This is the 30th Ask Us Anything that we've done going back, maybe I'd have to look, 6-7 years?
I think so. I would have only known it was a 30th because the invite said AUA number 30, the big 30.
So we're happy to do this. We're glad that the questions are still flow in, and we're gonna. I think we may go up to an hour here, and we appreciate everybody coming in. We appreciate people submitting questions. This is pretty loose compared to our presentation webinars, where we're gonna have some good questions, and we're gonna banter back and forth. And then we're gonna look ahead. Those of you who attend our presentation webinars, the next one is going to be November 1st. It's going to be presented by Dave Kippen, who I met up in Michigan at the Michigan Lean Consortium event, where we had some KaiNexus people in August. He's going to be giving a presentation, I think a really interesting topic, lean and mindfulness. And the registration for that will open real soon. I apologize for not having it open now, but you can go to kainexus.com/webinars. Greg, let me ask you just as a first question here. Like you kind of reacted to that. So
quick, our audio check sounds great, but we got feedback that they can't chat in the webinar. So I don't know if there's anything we need to do. If someone could chat just to make sure.
I can try to adjust some settings. So speaking of checklists, that's something we may need to add to the checklist. I will do what we call a short-term countermeasure. I will try to contain the problem by adjusting the settings. But Greg, maybe you reacted, I think, to the word mindfulness. Riff on that for a minute. And I think I've got chat turned on here. Like, is that what you were reacting to, or the oops chat?
I just thought it was super interesting that I hadn't heard lean and mindfulness. And I feel that probably my first association with mindfulness in my life was I learned to do transcendental meditation back in college, and it was a habit that didn't stick. But we can talk about habits later. But I do feel as though I'm trying to be more self-aware about how my emotions and my reactions are affecting other people. As we are further into this journey, I am constantly reminded that whether or not I think of myself as the CEO, I just think of myself as another person working at KaiNexus, but I am, and so I just need to be cognizant of that, whether I feel I have that kind of title or not. So that was my reaction. I was like, I don't think I can talk about this.
Well, so is transcendental meditation, is that something that you learn, or I guess you learn and then practice?
Hey, it's a very kind of simple form of meditation that I think all meditations, with my cursory knowledge, bring about some amount of mindfulness and self-awareness. And so it was just the name of it. I think it was a fatty type of meditation, but I think if you probably look at what it is, there's common threads in many different kinds of meditation. So it was a mantra-based meditation.
I mean, I've tried that. I like, a lot of people during pandemic times, like you get an offer like, hey, here's a free meditation app, and I tried it, and I really have trouble quieting my mind, which I know is what you're supposed to be working at. And you're not supposed to get frustrated,
right?
If that's difficult, like that's part of what that journey is. But that's not something that I've tried harder to pursue. Now I do try to be more aware. Like I think a related thing is being more self-aware.
Yeah.
How am I behaving? How am I coming across? Is my perception of that calibrated with how others are reacting? Or how they're perceiving it. That's probably something for a leader. And back to your point, I mean, Greg, this is a common situation of like the positional authority versus the personality of the person. And I've seen this a lot in healthcare, where people are like, I'm just a person. Like I'm approachable, and like as a person you are. But like you said, it is a fact that you are the CEO, like it or not. There's positional authority, and people might be bringing that with them from another job. right? Of how they've been taught to defer to a CEO or how to interact with a CEO. And that's different than how you are as a CEO. But I think it's good to be aware of, like, are people reacting to me, the person, or are they reacting to me in this position?
Right. And I think what's interesting about it is I feel as if it kind of adds an extra level of stress to what I'm trying to do, because I feel that I need to be kind of on my game. If I'm kind of having, a low energy day, or my mind is, on something negative, and maybe it's even personal, I need to be aware that, like, that's going to affect everyone in the room in different ways, and probably affect people in unintentional way, have a greater effect unintentionally. And so it's just things I've been thinking about with regard to, as we get bigger, what is that like? What is the best way I can be for making KaiNexus successful? So and I think mindfulness is one of those.
Well, good. Well, it's good you're reflecting on all of that. And then before we jump into the planned questions, I'm going to just close the loop a little bit on, okay, the chat is working. And, I think what's happening here is there was a problem. Somebody, if you will, pulled the andon cord, and thank you to the person or people who spoke up. And Greg, thank you for having that back channel, because obviously people can't send a chat saying, hey, chat's broken. Or chat's not set up properly. So to me, like in problem solving language here, we contained the problem, right? It was identified, we acknowledged it, we put the fire out, short-term countermeasure. But then, the long-term countermeasure is to absolutely go back to the Zoom setup and double check, is there a default that I thought was on that wasn't on, and or building it, or both, putting it into the checklist, long-term countermeasure. So
I cannot recommend. I'm a CEO of a technology company. Something about paper, though, still works really well. So anyway, here's the checklist.
We could build checklists in our own instance of the KaiNexus software. A recurring checklist we would use for each of these, right?
Right. And not to say that it couldn't be done, but sometimes I just want to have something in my hand that I can cross out. So,
well, when people talk about running their company on spreadsheets, we don't quote unquote run the company on spreadsheets, but we're using a spreadsheet. We're using Google Sheets, and that is the technology that people are using a lot of times before they come into KaiNexus. Not to get too deep into that, so we can look at that. We do use our KaiNexus platform quite a bit. I will mention, and let me ask it as a question, Greg, before we get to other people's questions. So when we log in, we should share a screenshot publicly. Like, our instance gets customized every month with like a really fun theme. And right now that theme is very Halloween.
That's scary. I mean, it's just downright scary.
How did that get to be, Greg?
Well, it's funny, Mark. There is a super secret theme team that every month changes the theme on KaiNexus. And what they're doing is using all of our branding functionality to use it in really creative ways. And in the spirit of the super secret, I really don't know exactly who's on the team.
It's a surprise to you.
I could make some guesses, but it is truly a surprise to me. And so
you can't even, okay, so I thought you were going to say I wasn't listening. I thought you were going to say you don't know what the theme is going to be. You can't even go apply positional pressure as CEO to tell them what the theme should be.
Oh, that would be definitely stifling creativity. Come on, Mark. We know that the people at KaiNexus are way more creative than I am. So
that would be
it's pretty cool. The first of every month's always fun because it goes live on the first, and they even get down into making everyone's avatar theme appropriate. And so I am Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, the old school, not the deaf one, this month. And I think that's very appropriate.
So here, let me, and I am going to screen share real quick because there'll be a video recording of this. Not to get, I'm sorry to, we won't get distracted on this very long, but here's when I log in to our KaiNexus instance of KaiNexus. We see the fun Halloween theme up here. We see Spooky Ophi as kind of, our mascot and character, and OFI, opportunity for improvement. And And this is fun. So if we have customers watching this, Greg, like who would they talk to if they want to do similar fun things with their own instances?
Talk to their CSM, talk to their SE. Honestly, a lot of this stuff they could probably do themselves, and it's a great way. And we're using it to highlight a bunch of things. And a lot of people at KaiNexus will look at this the first time, and then they will change their default board because their default board is precious to them. It's how they jump off into a lot of their workflows. And so it doesn't always have to just stick like that. And, but you have to have a lot of creativity. But we've seen that being used in lots of different ways. At least an announcements card would be a no-brainer for a lot of places to take advantage of.
All right, well, cool. All right, so we have some questions that have come in from the audience. There are questions we're going to cover here today related to KaiNexus, the company, continuous improvement, leadership, culture. Like there's such an interesting mix of questions. We'll start off with one that's kind of a fun get to know us question. Maybe, short answer to it. What was your dream job when you were a kid? And I'll say, Greg, I hope one of those was either ER doc or you probably didn't dream of being a software company founder and CEO. But what was your dream job?
I take it you're getting first mover advantage in that you get to allow me to answer it first.
Please.
So I really have no memory of a dream job per se, but I feel though very early I was thinking about being a doctor. Definitely didn't know what kind of doctor. Honestly, my earliest memories would have been in the early 80s about this, and emergency medicine really was in its infancy as a specialty. So it would have even been hard to have known. I do remember where I was the first time I heard about ER as a specialty, and I was already in med school by then. I was in my first semester for several months of medical school when I kind of found out about the specialty and what that meant. So I don't know if that's my dream job, but it was certainly something I had been thinking about really deeply for many, many, many years. What about you, Mark?
Oh, that's cool. I had one. There's one I've talked about. Let me give you two real quick. So one, when I was in elementary school, my dream job was to be what they call a beat writer who would travel with a baseball team like the Detroit Tigers. I grew up in Detroit. I would have never thought of this as a job, but one of my best friends in elementary school, his dad, that was his job. And I love baseball. His dad got to travel with the team, got to go to he got paid to be a baseball fan, as I viewed it, and then write about the games. So that was one dream job. As I got a little bit older, I was really into music, and I had a dream job of being a percussionist, more specifically a timpani player with an orchestra. And I decided not to pursue music as a career.
I did not know that about you.
I was a weird kid with a lot of different interests. How about that?
Yeah.
So, all right, we've covered that. Greg, there's a question for you, and we haven't done one of these since last December.
Yep.
So maybe, as a follow-up, someone's wondering, are you all fully back in the office now? And if so, what COVID safety precautions are you still taking today, then being October 2022?
Sure. So we, as you may or may, I know you know this, Mark, but as other people may or may not know, we basically dissolved the Austin office pretty early in the pandemic. It aligned with our lease commitments, and had started to look back to getting into an office almost 9 months ago. And then the Omicron surge happened, and that delayed things. But we opened up July 1, I think it was official. And now we have a really, pretty amazing, I think, headquarters. I'd love to say corporate headquarters, just to jab the Dallas folks, office here in Austin. And it's definitely a hybrid situation. We don't have any rules about if and when you come in. Right now, we just don't really see them as being necessary. I'm always never want to close doors on if we'll do that in the future. But right now, it seems to be working really well. Where I would say there are some people that never come in, and then there's some people that come in every day, and then there's everything in between. And so it's a really cool space.
Yeah. So other than the wall behind you, which is still like to be decorated,
you've not done. So it's a mixture of some kind of open work areas and collaborative work areas, and then these individual rooms where people can be on meetings and whatnot. And the individual rooms have not been decorated quite yet.
So as a random idea, at some point, maybe someone could like do a tour of the new Dallas office, just like, or not the, I'm sorry, the new Austin office. There's also the group in Dallas who's had their office for a while, but like just even do like just kind of an iPhone walkthrough. It might be fun to show people that space, because out in the main area, you know, there's a lot of personality that comes through, and it is a cool space. One other question here, I think related, and this will be the end of the COVID talk. Thoughts on timing to get the new Omicron booster? Who should get it? How do we think through that? And there maybe isn't an easy answer, but.
So, in to give context, early in the pandemic, I became very interested in all the science related to it. We as a company did a bunch of kind of ask us anythings related to the pandemic, and I started to do a blog about it. It ultimately morphed into Letters to Humans, and over the last year or so, I just really haven't written much on it. So I spend quite a bit of time, still not as much as before, Mark, but still, you know, a reasonable amount of time keeping up with things. And so with regard to the boosters, I think we're really at a point in the pandemic where we're probably closer to being pre-pandemic than we've ever been. And I think the data is really clear that this is a 3-shot series. And then, fourth shots and beyond become far less important for people not in high risk group. So if you're not in the over 65, other health medical problems, or in an immunocompromised state, it's still recommended. I would follow CDC guidelines, but it's probably not as important if you keep up with that. And I say that because really those initial shots they have really good protection and durable protection and broad protection against a lot of really all the variants with regard to protecting you against severe disease, hospitalization, and death. Mm-hmm. I think everyone knows that the amount of protection they give you against getting the infection has plummeted. And really, I think we just need to refocus the framework of what are we trying to accomplish with the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And so I had COVID in June, so I'm waiting for my booster, which would be my 4th shot, till 6 months after that. So I'll be looking to do it probably in late October or November. And I'm 47. I have high blood pressure, well controlled. So if someone in my state said, "Hey, Greg, I don't think I really want to do shots after the 3rd shot," I'd say, "Cool, it's up to you." Mm-hmm. I think if you're visiting, if you're have more medical problems, if you really want to try to prevent getting the infection, because those boosters really do prevent you for a while. So you got a stretch of time that you really can't get sick, then that would be you might want to reconsider that. But that's kind of my approach and thought process at this point.
And if people are watching this as these things change and evolve, probably good advice: check the CDC guidelines, talk to your doctor based on your own health and family around you and other situations, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have a 96-year-old grandmother, and my folks are in one of those 3 high risk categories. So, I think it's a much stronger recommendation than if you're a 30-year-old person with no medical problems. So, okay.
Well, thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
So here's a question that came in. Kathy, it was, I don't always remember to look at the name here. Kathy, if you're watching, thanks for your question. What do you think are the most common mistakes when implementing Kanban, and how would you mitigate them? And I'm going to take this question and maybe let's just generalize it, because you could plug and play that same question, copy and paste, search and replace Kanban with 5S or whatever lean method. So maybe, let's just talk about this more generally. I mean, like, Three things come to mind. I don't know if they're most common, but they're common. So let me run through 3 real quick and then bounce it to you, Greg. I think one is starting with the tool, saying we are going to implement this tool instead of framing it as what problem are we solving. So even back to Kanban, and Kanban, this could refer to the flow of parts in a factory at a hospital, or it could refer to the planning method that's often sticky notes on the wall, or people can do Kanban in KaiNexus. But like, what are we trying to accomplish by using this tool? Like, I think your odds of a tool not having impact or people giving up on it is when it feels like we're implementing it just to implement it. We should be doing this. Other companies are doing this. You've got to frame it to either what's the problem or what are we trying to accomplish. Two, I think not, like being too rigid in how you're using the tool. I think there's a trap of people saying, well, we have to do it this exact way because this other company does it that way, or someone taught me to do it that way. Like, you might be taught a starting point, but then adapt and adjust based on your own learning and your own needs. And so I always encourage people, don't be too rigid. And then third rule would be not engaging enough people in, like, if we were to think of this, I would always try to point people back to an A3 problem solving process. So are we engaging people in understanding the need for change, the current condition, the gaps in performance? When we engage people early on about defining and understanding the problem, and then engage them in deciding what countermeasures or tools are we going to use, you're doing a better job of bringing people along through the process instead of a small group of people deciding we're going to go implement this, and now we're trying to implement it, and then we hear, how do we gain buy-in from people? It might be too late at that point. So try to gain buy-in early and often.
I think it's interesting. When I looked at the question, I'm glad you went first, because you're right on the Kanban. We don't even know what kind of Kanban Kathy was talking about. So I'm glad you generalized it. And I wrote down 3 things that I think could be added to this that would just add more color. Probably could be thought of as just a really general kind of almost change management. But I think it's just so important to start with why. Like, why are we doing this? Which I think is another way of saying is, what's the problem, that we're trying to solve?
Or what's the opportunity?
I'd also like to say, before we go on, for this entire hour, Mark and I are going to talk about things. And just because we say, oh, this is the way it should be done, doesn't mean we're always perfect at doing these things. And we're always having to self-correct, and someone will bring something up and go, oh, yes, I'm not following that principle. Thank you for being allowing me to get better. But I always, so start with why. I wrote down, don't let better be the enemy of good. I think sometimes you just have to start on something and let it evolve from there, and then make it easy. I think if you are teaching something new to somebody and you make it a 15-step process that has multiple sub topics and tasks, and but if it's on Tuesday, we're going to use this, and just try to make it as easy as possible, and then build from there. So I would add that to some of the comments you made.
Yeah. One of the things I was going to add here, along the lines of, I think we both touched on something maybe related to what's often called scientific problem solving. Instead of saying, I know we need to implement that solution, lean thought process or A3 problem solving process would take you more through a process of understanding the problem. And then, and I know this language sounds torturous at times, but instead of saying we're going to go implement this solution that we know is going to work, the mindset is more of, we have a hypothesis that if we test this countermeasure, we will see positive results that we predicted without huge side effects, right? We go and test a countermeasure, or we're testing the way we do it, and we've got to be open to the possibility of there's something we didn't anticipate, or we've learned something new. Let's go back and adjust. That's at least a vaguely scientific problem-solving process. But at the same time, like the idea that we can iterate our way to good, we could get tripped up where, like, there's a time and a place for doing a little bit of research, right? There's some science, or there's some knowledge that we could use as a basis for our scientific experiments. And I think a lot of it's really situational, right? We don't want to research it to death.
Right.
We don't want to be afraid to try something, but at the same time, like, especially in an organization, if we're given permission to go try something, it's hard to get a second chance sometimes. Right? That's maybe not how it should be, but maybe that's how it is for people in some organizations, in some cultures. You know, what's the right amount of research without doing too much? And then how do we go and try something that's not 100% guaranteed to work without being reckless? Like there's middle ground, right?
And I think that's where being in a company with high trust helps, because people just trust that people are kind of, I don't want to say doing the best they can, but like doing the best they can. And it's not, and I think that, but I think it's so interesting that my background in being a physician has helped in just ingrain the kind of that scientific thinking, because the entire history, physical, and then, developing a differential, and but that entire thought process is a little bit of a scientific, methodology in practice. So you don't want to sit there and ask 3 questions and then go, okay, I know what's wrong with you, and we're going to do that, right? But you also can't say, oh, we're going to ask 3,000 questions, because we can't go forever. And so kind of finding that balance where you feel, I think, is an important thing. I want to also just throw out maybe a third thing. Fourth thing is make it obvious. So I have dry eyes, people that are looking at monitors all day. And when you don't treat your dry eyes, you actually see more pores. So my ophthalmologist is like, you got to use this stuff, 5-6 times a day. And so I always forgot. And then I make it obvious because it's sitting here on my desk. And then I remember as soon as I feel the symptom. Anyway, so make it obvious.
I saw you use them, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, just maybe one other question to you, back to the idea of being a doctor. If somebody came into you or came into a primary care physician saying, well, I want to implement this countermeasure. Like, I know a lot of people on medication for high blood pressure. I want that too. Like, you're going to go back and understand what's the problem, or even is there a problem, before you would try a countermeasure, right?
That's I love that analogy. That's a perfect, that's like, I feel like I've heard some people use the analogy of the ophthalmologist saying, oh, well, you don't see well. Oh, cool. Well, I've got these glasses here. See if they work, versus, doing an exam and getting data and understanding current condition before you prescribe or test. Anyway, I love that. Yeah.
And with a lot of medications, there is a bit of a PDSA process around dosing. And like, I've been on a statin medication for cholesterol for a while. And, there's an adjustment of, like, you would try a small dose. And if that's not having enough of an effect, you're probably hopefully doing other countermeasures related to diet and exercise, but this could be genetic. So then maybe you have to adjust the dose. You figure it out, right?
You notice we didn't start with the large dose. So that could kind of talk a little bit about the Kanban, question, just, going overboard as your initial first step. If you were wrong, the effects of being wrong are going to be greater versus,
Yeah. So that comes back to the idea of small test of change. I would always recommend, instead of rolling a tool out company-wide as a big bang, well, you got to start somewhere and like get those early lessons learned at a point where it's not as quote unquote embarrassing, right? Learn and adjust and refine, and then start spreading that practice that's been refined while realizing it's still not perfect. And we're going to have continued improvement loops. So this is kind of related. I mean, we're talking about mistakes people might make implementing a tool. There's a question, maybe it's somebody who listens, gratuitous plug, My Favorite Mistake podcast. Greg has been a guest on that podcast. So, the question here is, how do you, Greg, as a CEO, think about creating a culture of learning from mistakes? How important is that to you? And what are some of the things that you do as a leader?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because I think when there's a lot of ways to tackle it. So one, I think that many years ago, I kind of, in the software kind of lore / information to read about, they talk about, mistakes are wonderful, and I'll only invest in someone that's had a couple failed startups first. And I'm always very off-puttish to that. I'm always like, mistakes suck. I mean, let's be honest. Like, no one ever wants to make a mistake, right? And so the difference between I think taking a mistake and making a negative thing versus making it positive is your thought process on it, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is, I think, why growth mindset is one of our values. And so if you are a fixed mindset and you make a mistake, then the interpretation of that is, I'm an awful person. I'm not good at this.
I'm sloppy.
I'm sloppy. And it's like almost in a personal front. Oh, we are a bad company. We couldn't get this right. Versus a growth mindset would take a mistake and look at that and go, oh, wow. Well, I mean, I learned something here. Mm-hmm. How are we going to do this again differently? And so it's really interesting. I was, I'm very proud, but we just scored a 5 out of 5 on our penetration test. So as you may or may not know, software companies hire other companies to try to break into the system just to see, how good our security is. And I was telling it to my family, and I was describing that, part of the testing is there's the social hacking, and then there's the penetration hacking. And I explained, oh yeah, well, last year the social test, they caught us, they got in, and my daughter Micah, she was like, well, what happened to the person that I'm allowed to do that? And I was like, I don't know. What do you mean? What happened to the person? Like, well, did you fire her, or is she no longer working? And I was just like, Micah, no. Like this, like we all learned from it. Like like this was a really amazing thing. That happened. That we, if we wouldn't have had that quote mistake, right? If we wouldn't have, I don't want to say celebrated, but like really highlighted and said, oh, good, we can all learn from this. Then 2 things happen. One, that person, feels like not only horrible, even because they already feel that much more horrible, but it becomes a hiding kind of culture, right? Oh, well, I'm never going to let anyone know. But then 2, there's like the learning of that. So I think, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but these are kind of the ways I'm thinking through that.
Well, so there's a couple things I was going to say, but then I want to come back to the question of, so one thing you're doing is, you're sharing stories. So I guess talking to KaiNexus people about how you think about mistakes is trying to influence them.
Yep.
I think in a good way here. And the reaction in that moment, like that's leading by example of not making a big show of firing that person and giving them a box and dragging them out to the street. And then that would send a message, of mistakes being intolerable. But I think there's this balance here. Like there's this thing about celebrating mistakes. If there's a connection to learning, that should be celebrated. We wouldn't repeat making the same mistake over and over again.
Right. Great point.
Should be learning and creating a culture where we can learn. And then I think if you err too far on the side of punishing mistakes, that drives problems underground, then you can't improve. And then you might literally be repeating the same mistake over and over again because nobody even dares recognize that. And, we all make mistakes, like you said. Well, by the definition of the word, people didn't mean to do that. If it was intentional, we would call that sabotage, and that might be a fireable offense, But recognizing and finding this balance of almost just expecting mistakes are going to happen to prepare yourself for how you would react when you make a mistake or you work with somebody else and they make a mistake. And then there's the more complicated situations of quote unquote systemic mistakes, systemic errors. So those are a couple of thoughts that came to mind for me, but maybe let me bounce it back to you. Like, how do you think through, like back to the point at the beginning, whether you like it or not, you have this position of CEO and co-founder. People look to you. What do you do as a CEO to try to create that sort of mindset, the growth mindset, even more broadly?
I mean, I think one, there's that direct coaching, but I'm in constant. I'm constantly striving to lead by example or by teaching, and one of the things I think probably a lot of people here at KaiNexus have seen me do, and sometimes I'm doing it intentionally, and sometimes I'm just doing it because it's who I am. But I've apologized to people. I mean, I just about 4 to 6 weeks ago, I treated someone really poorly, and I was not proud of it. And still, in the moment of that meeting, I could not go on with. I just stopped it, and I just said, "Hey, I want to apologize. That was a totally inappropriate way for me to treat you, and it was not called for. And please accept my apology." And so I felt proud of myself for saying that, because I think the 5 year ago version of myself would have kind of just brushed it off and moved on and not really realized. But anyway, so I think leading by example, that's my story.
Well, and what you're describing there shows growth, right? To think about how I might have handled it in the past. And I think there's an important component of owning your role in something, even if there are systemic factors, right? So if you acted in a way that clearly upset somebody, a different person in that same situation might say, well, they're too sensitive, right? They just deflect and blame them. Now, that person might be sensitive. And if that were really true, then maybe, should you adjust your behavior? Right? You can't change who you are, but, you keep that in mind. Don't blame, don't deflect. Let's say, that person was having a really bad day. Well, that was maybe a contributing factor, not your fault. Like on a different day, they might have reacted differently. But still, I think it's healthy to say, well, there might have been other factors involved, but here's what I did. I can reflect and I can try to grow, right?
So I think that's important. I think if you want to develop a culture of growth mindset, if you want to develop a culture of we're learning from our mistakes, when senior leaders make a mistake, whether big or small, I think it really reflects and into people like us do things like this to do that. And quite frankly, I think if people think less of you for doing that, it's probably not people you want to lead. And so that's another kind of thing to think through. So I think it's one thing if you were literally making a mistake every 5 minutes and apologize. I mean, it's like, come on, but you can take anything to its extreme and it has the opposite effect. But if it's being done in an authentic way, and if it's being done in an authentic way, I'll just say that, because you could look at that like, how public was it? How long did it take? What was the appropriate way to handle it? If it's just done in an authentic way, then I think people see that.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, let's move on to another question. This came in from Clint. With the work that you do, how do you let me rephrase it. You can count things like how many customers you have. You can count things like how many people are using the system. How do you know the impact that your customers are having, the impact you're having on them as customers?
Yeah. So two cool milestones, but I'll answer your question directly. When we're reporting on the impact, so we just crossed an amazing milestone. You set that up very nicely for me to kind of mention that. But we've crossed 5 billion of impact that is logged in our system, and
that's
when
$5 billion.
Correct, U.S. dollars, and I think we do our best to try to. We are obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but we're tracking impact in many different currencies, because we have about 30 to 40% of our customers are international and they're doing business in lots of different currencies. But it's really an accumulation of adding up all of the impacts that our customers have put in with regard to their improvement work. So it's pretty cool, because it's not an estimation of what we think KaiNexus organizations put in, but it's literally what they've logged. And so the other kind of cool milestone that I'll flex and share is we crossed 1 million completed items in the system in the month of September of this past September.
And items would include, like kind of in the origins of KaiNexus 11, 12 years ago, an opportunity for improvement. but those items could include A3s and projects
Mac or charts or even tasks are added as items. Literally, because the system is so configurable, as you know, Mark, we can't kind of differentiate. Every organization does different kind of templates, but it includes all of those things. But then it's 1 million. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and those numbers are on our website and they get updated fairly often. I know it's not a real time.
Yeah, about quarterly. I think there's
quarterly. Yeah. So I encourage people to go look at that if they're interested. And there's a side question. I'll ask it. Something we've talked about, for a long time. So, customers are reporting their own impact of improvements, and it's not just cost savings; it's quality and safety, and categorized and quantified in different ways. The 5 billion number just happens to be very noticeable.
Right.
Just crossing that threshold recently. But it comes back to the question of how much of the improvement or how much of the benefit comes from the three things that we talk about, the methodologies, the leadership, and the technology. It's kind of all intertwined. It's hard to sort out, right? How much of it is because they're using software?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you this: we're not forcing anyone to use KaiNexus, right? People are coming to us, or so. There's certainly there's going to be a factor of, well, what would these organizations have done without KaiNexus? And you could have that. What's really cool is when organizations have that back data and we end up importing that in, so they have their baseline, and then to see that inflection point of when they start rolling out KaiNexus, it is pretty magical to see. It's really cool. And then you talk to those the CI professionals that are I'll say big drivers of spreading it, and their whole face just lights up and about how really it's a leverage. And so really, yeah, I mean, you have to have that methodology, and you have to have those leadership behaviors. Otherwise, the technology would literally do nothing. I just wanted to touch about one other point on the impact that I think is cool, is that we just, in one of the recent releases, we just added the ability to start tracking things like, you could do it before, you just couldn't do it as elegantly. CO2 emissions. Mm-hmm. So we have a number of manufacturing, or we have mining organizations that are really trying to decrease their environmental impact, and they want to report on that in really specific ways. And so, we're not talking about safety, satisfaction, environmental impact, or the benefit of these changes. So it's pretty cool to be involved in kind of creating this positive change in different places around the world.
Yeah, that is great. You can measure what tons of CO2 would be a measure of that.
That's the one. That's the one they keep. Yeah, there's no true elegant way to do that. Or you could even measure. In a lot of these, I'll just give an example. In mining processes, they need to use water, for instance. And if you figured out a improvement on a process to decrease the amount of water you needed, that would be and a resource improvement. So
yeah, that's great. And the way I guess I think through it, there are improvements that are happening that never get tabulated, or they get tabulated in ways that are hard to
aggregate,
roll up and aggregate. So KaiNexus certainly has that function. But then I think there's a piece where it's not just better tracking the improvement. There's the collaboration that's happening as improvements are being worked on. You could argue, and I think in a lot of cases where through better communication, through better visibility, by bringing people in that would be difficult to involve otherwise, you're aiming for better improvement, like more effective improvement, more of it. And then there's the spread factor, which maybe comes back then to kind of logging and tabulating and sharing ideas across an organization of seeing problems, solving problems, and sharing what you've done. KaiNexus really kind of helps people see what they've reported, work on the solving, and then share what you've done.
Yeah, perfectly said.
I said that not as a salesperson, but that's my attempt at that's kind of what we hear customers talking about in terms of how they're using it. So, all right. So here's another question here. This is from Charles. What is more important than a cultural transformation from top management down to the people on the shop floor before implementing lean and using lean tools? So the way I'm reading that question is, I guess it's making a statement. There's maybe proposing there's nothing more important than cultural transformation from top management down to the shop floor. But then, so here's, I think, the part that's interesting of like how before implementing lean, like it's a chicken and egg scenario here, right?
Yes.
Because culture change, let alone transformation, is not like flipping a light switch. It's a process. It's a journey. It's more, I think, an iterative thing where the culture change comes from people being inspired enough that we need to change, learning enough to then go start trying some things. Mm-hmm. And then how do you roll that out?
Having the air cover or the psychological safety to try these things. I mean, I think Seth Godin's definition of culture comes to mind here. People like us do things like this.
Yeah.
It was, there's nothing more important than being a runner before you do a marathon. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
What do runners do? They run. They're like so. There's this. I think the important thing here is what I'm hearing is cultural transformations. So we're going to do a behavior in a repetitive way at an organization is going to have to include the senior leadership. Now, whether that's the senior leadership of a team or a plant or a hospital, I mean, there is very hard to execute this completely from a ground up method. So I think that's the kind of important thing. I think now you're going to be using lean tools in order to do that, and hopefully you're picking simple ones that can be utilized in wide varieties of areas, and then you're doing all the things that we mentioned in 3 prior questions, or you're not doing those mistakes. But I think there's the only way to have a cultural transformation is to start doing that work and or have the management give that air cover and show the importance, but then going beyond that and getting involved a bit.
Yeah. I mean, back to the chicken and egg thing here. I think there are times when culture change or small instances of a little bit of culture change can become a driver of being able to, quote unquote, do lean things, right? Mm-hmm. So what culture and mindset do you need to have in place to, let's say, if you're in a factory, effectively utilize an andon cord system? And there are stories of plants that have installed this equipment, and then it was a waste of money because, unlike the Toyota culture where you pull the andon cord and there's this response from leaders of how do we help? In some environments, if you install that equipment and somebody pulls the cord and they get yelled at for potentially stopping the line, you can say like, this some of this goes, maybe there are some elements of culture that you need to have in place before implementing some sort of lean method, or you would test it and then identify the culture gap and then go work on it. But I think you could anticipate some of those culture gaps that could get in the way. But then culture change is also a result of doing lean things, like engaging people in structured continuous improvement. You don't need to have a perfect lean culture to start doing, plan, do, study, adjust mode improvement. And you've got to have enough leeway or the right culture to let people try things that, quote unquote, don't work. Right. And, if the PDSA cycles are not a cycle, if it's a straight path of here's the things we implemented, maybe you're just wrapping different language around the same old improvement attempts you had before. So it's an interesting question. I think it just goes to show a lot of this is it's just a matter. It goes hand in hand. I don't
because it could if it was there is nothing more important than getting leadership buy-in and or leadership behaviors to facilitate doing lean on the shop floor, utilizing lean tools.
Yeah.
And so I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I mean, I'm not going to say it's completely futile because there will be some good that happens from it. But I think, from a sustainability standpoint, it's futile if you're going to try to do something on the shop floor, but the management and or leader level of that plant is not understanding what's about to go down. I mean, they will 100% stop it because, in a place that doesn't have that mentality of, let me come help, then why is the line stopping?
Yeah.
If we're not going to go like fix something or improve something, then don't stop it. If we're just going to go yell at people,
Well, and it comes back to that culture of responding appropriately to problems or mistakes or however you frame it. So let's say if someone's working on an assembly line and you go to grab a part and it slips out of your hands and falls on the floor. That would be a classic moment to reach up and pull the andon cord because now you've fallen behind in your work. You have to grab another part. Maybe that part's sitting there. It's a tripping hazard. So now you have to address it. You've fallen behind in your work. And that's where, you would pull the andon cord to say, okay, something went wrong. And then a team leader responds. And there might be, this comes back to short-term countermeasures. So like, okay, I'm going to get that dropped part out of the way. Let me get you another one. Okay, we recovered and the line never stopped. Or you stop the line long enough to put quality and safety first and get back on track. If you didn't have that help culture of helping, somebody might feel pressured. I dropped that part. Oh God, I can't get in trouble. I'm going to put it on the car anyway. Right? Now you might be creating a defect that flows downstream. It might even get all the way to the customer. And I think that's part of the damage that occurs when there's a culture that pressures people into hiding mistakes. And then you might come back and do a longer term countermeasure. Let's say the part's just hard to grab. It just gets in, like if you gotten a little bit sweaty and it slips out of your hand real easily, you might need to give people gloves, or you might redesign the part to be a little bit easier to hold on to, because what you don't want to be doing is constantly reacting to the same problem all day long. At some point you would stop, or even at the end of the shift say, okay, now we need to do something closer to some root cause problem solving so that we can prevent that from happening again.
So I just thought of something. It's kind of related to what you're talking about, but a little different. So as part of the checklist, one of the things is to put a sign on the door that says webinar in progress. Mm-hmm. And literally 45 seconds before we're about to start, someone opened the door and I said, didn't you see the sign? Right? Which obviously that person saw the sign, they wouldn't have come in. So I'm thinking through it and I'm thinking, maybe I'm putting the sign in the wrong place. What if I put the sign and I just taped it right over the door handle? So for you to open the door, you would literally need to touch this. You see where I'm going with that?
Well, that's sort of some mistake.
Sign to be more careful? Exactly, mistake proofing.
It's mistake proofing. Because it would be easy to say, well, they should have seen the sign.
Correct.
Well, okay, well, fine. I mean, there's lots of should and shouldn'ts, and but then there's
a mistake. I went to blame. I blame person? Oh, well, didn't you read the sign? Instead of thinking, oh, there's an opportunity, because that person obviously doesn't want to interrupt me during a webinar. Like, what could we have done better to have made it more visible that was happening? Anyway, it's just an interesting.
Well, so the short-term countermeasure was get out, which it's not what you said, but like, okay, we hadn't started yet, so it wasn't really an interruption. But if somebody came in and started talking, you would say, okay, wait, no, okay, short-term countermeasure would be quiet and get out of the room. And then, I think you're right to come back then to what could we do to really prevent that? Like, I think just telling people, be careful, is an ineffective strategy. Putting the sign directly over the doorknob would be better. Here's one other thing that I've done when it comes to the webinars. There's always a risk that I forget to click record. Now, one countermeasure, and this is probably the better countermeasure, is to set Zoom to automatically start recording, and then I just edit out the part that's not formally the webinar. I know how to do that. It creates risk. And now this is where I'm trying to be proactive, and maybe I should go back and make this change to the process, because there's that risk of not hitting record what I've done in the past, instead of having a note on my desk that says record, I've put that right on my trackpad. Right. Because I'm going to interact with that trackpad. And it's very similar to you putting a sign over the door handle. I'm going to touch and I'm not recording. Let me hit record. I would at least catch the problem. But I think, yeah, I'm going to go back and look at the Zoom settings, not just on allowing chat to everybody, but I should turn on that auto record feature. We're learning and we're growing, right?
I love it.
I'm not a bad webinar host. I'm growing as a webinar host. How's that?
Think we can knock out one more?
We can. Is there a question that some of these questions are hard to address in a short period of time? Well, here, okay, let's I'm going to pull a question forward and we'll hold some other questions. And so that here is a question about where'd it go? Okay. This is a question that came in from Joe in Michigan. I know which Joe this is. Is there value for companies in expanding resources further into their communities? And I think we'd say this is related to lean or to foster deeper ties, to influence culture change that would be beneficial for people outside the company. Is that an option in the US? And so, like, for me, a couple things come to mind. One is companies that do pro bono improvement work for others, nonprofits in their communities. Toyota comes to mind. They have a nonprofit group called the TSSC that goes out, works with food banks and nonprofit health systems, and they're giving back. They use language like, they're giving back to society by teaching what they know about improvement and process design and problem solving. We tried that a little bit. I'm also thinking back to KaiNexus. We tried offering up some software.
I think we successfully.
Okay.
Yeah. We
talk about that before we wrap.
Yeah, I mean, we created an instance of KaiNexus where people were sharing, and this is go back to so December 2020 was when they initially approved the vaccine, and then people remember that first 3 to 6 months, increasing the way people were delivering the vaccine, both in a supply chain standpoint as well as vaccine clinics and whatnot. There was a lot of learning that had to happen, and so we facilitated a lot of that. And I think it died down after 5 or 6 months when that initial surge of people wanting vaccines kind of got more in a steady state that healthcare could help. But that was a lot of fun. In fact, and Maggie Millar, our VP of customer experience, was really, really involved in that and kind of moderated that site, and it got people connected and all sorts of things. So,
yeah, and I think and that was offered up free to people, and we had users in the U.S. and Canada from different organizations, and I think it was good to try to help others. But then it was an experiment for KaiNexus to open up that sort of like, what would happen if you opened up cross-organization sharing and collaboration
on a particular topic, or it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna wrap up here. Greg, we pick on Greg for saying whatnot. That's your favorite. What's the word? Disfluency.
Disfluency. Yeah. Was I using it during this? Whatnot.
You did, and it's okay. But what's the word disfluency? Because that's a word people probably don't know. I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, getting rid of the ands, ums. One of the ones I've been really focused on lately is like. I have this habit of doing. You can say the exact same sentence without the word like, and it means the exact same things if you're using it as a filler. And there's a lot of ways to get disfluencies out. Mostly it's simply slowing your speech down and putting pauses in when you realize you're about to say it. And you'll get quicker and quicker about those pauses, but that's the main way. So yeah, it's
sorry to poke at you about that, but habits are hard to break. I know you've worked on it. We're all working on it. It's a matter of growth mindset, right? Greg is not bad with disfluencies. He's working on it. He's growing.
Or maybe I'm bad with disfluencies, but it doesn't make me a bad person because I'm bad with disfluencies, or I couldn't get better with that.
Yeah, it certainly does not make you a bad person. So we want to thank everybody for staying on here today. We'll do one of these. Hopefully we won't wait another 10 months or so. Let's do one of these sooner. The next presentation webinar, again, is going to be on November 1st. Dave Kippen talking about lean and mindfulness. So you'll be able to register for that real soon at KaiNexus.com/webinar. So Greg, hey, this was fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I always learn so much being with you and hearing you talk and think through different things. So I appreciate it.
Well, likewise, I appreciate it too. And I want to thank everyone for kind of joining us as we stand here and gab. So thanks again.
We'll see everyone next time.
Next time.